indie game garden.
Julia Minamata is an artist and solo indie dev, or solo-ish indie dev, as she will say in the interview. She's best known for the Crimson Diamond, an EGA text parser mystery adventure game where you play as the mineralogist and reluctant detective Nancy Maple as she investigates increasingly mysterious happenings at the Crimson Lodge, a stately old house in the middle of a ghost town known as Crimson. EGA, for folks who don't know, stands for Enhanced Graphics Adapter, which was a standard for PC displays introduced in 1984 that allowed for up to 16 colors to be on screen simultaneously. It was a major leap over the older 4-color CGA displays, bringing classic adventure games like King's Quest to life. These are the games that Julia was raised on, and it's an honor to hear more about her journey today. It's also just a personal honor for me to have Julia on the show because she's someone who I really look up to as a game designer, an artist, and just a human being. So welcome, Julia. Well, Julia, thank you so much for being on the show today. It means a lot to me, and I know for the listeners too, it will be a special episode. To start out, I was wondering if you could talk me through your journey with games and just kind of your journey toward making the Crimson Diamond in the first place. I know it was not, a typical, like I always wanted to. I studied programming, that kind of thing. So I'd just love to hear the tale.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was very lucky in that my dad was always kind of an early adopter with things. Like he had a video camcorder really early on. We always had a computer in the house. The first one we had was a Commodore VIC-20. And from there, we just always had one. And with those machines come along games. And so when I was, 6 years old, maybe 5, 6 years old, I started to become familiar and comfortable with just having a computer in the house and seeing what games we would have, what he would bring home from the office. And it kind of started from there. So ever since I was like a kid, I loved games and loved playing them. I never thought that I'd end up actually making them. That was not something that was really on my radar until like way later down the road. But that interest was always there. And it was only until like way later down the road when the tools became so much easier to use and like learning about the tools was so much easier that I actually started to get into it, which was really good timing for me. And that's where it kind of just started. That initial interest was always there. It just was a matter of the ability and accessibility to the tools that kind of had to meet me at a certain time.
Yeah. And your background was in art, or what was kind of was there any training that you had that kind of translated, or was it all kind of self-taught?
My background is in art. I went to school for art. I went to a special arts high school, and then I went to a college for art here in Toronto, in Ontario. And I specialized in illustration, in editorial illustration. And we were taught drawing and painting and all those types of things, but also, and this part was, I think, very useful for me as I started to dip my toe into becoming like a game developer, especially an indie game developer. They were teaching us how to kind of run our own businesses and how to promote ourselves and how to be comfortable sharing our work and discussing our work. And all that. So not only just the artistic aspect of it, which is huge when you're making games, and particularly adventure games, where there's so much of what people are attracted to in the genre is these beautiful settings and these characters and things like that. But also the business aspect of it, like that expectation that I'm going to need to share my work and do that publicly and kind of open myself to kind of discourse and discussing my work in that way. That was all stuff that I had picked up during school. And yeah, I definitely use that stuff to this day. Also stuff like doing graphic design and doing, our own websites and all that stuff. That's all stuff I learned in school. And yeah, everything I've learned up to this point has been super helpful. But speaking to the programming part of it, yeah, I took a couple, like maybe in high school, maybe there was like a Java course. And I also learned there was a teaching language called Turing, which was developed in Toronto at U of T, University of Toronto. I had a bit of that, like a course here, a course there, but that was way early, in my education. And it was only like way after college did I actually start coming back to this idea of like, oh, maybe I want to look into what games can do nowadays, that I started to really get into something like Adventure Game Studio, which is like this purpose-built engine for adventure games, which made it so much easier for me I didn't have zero programming knowledge. I just had very, very little programming knowledge. And I still to this day have very little programming knowledge. But the great thing is I don't need a lot of programming knowledge to actually make a full game anymore. And that's kind of what's so great about making a game in like in the early 2000s.
Yeah, that's it's really cool, and one of the things that I'm constantly reminded of is like, even though for someone like me who doesn't have a technical background, looking at these engines still can be pretty intimidating. I mean,
Yes, absolutely.
even the simplified tools we were talking off air about, Dave Lloyd's like Power Quest
Hmm.
in Unity, and like he's like, yeah, like it's super simple. I made all these simple tools, and you like install it and look at it, and it's like, oh my goodness, Dave, this is wild. And of course, he has more of a technical background, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's awesome that folks like you are able to make games because you made a beautiful one, and I know
Oh,
you're
thank
gonna
you.
continue to. Um,
Yes.
which brings me to my next question about like, obviously the Crimson Diamond is steeped in a history. You can tell in the creator's history of these text parser adventure games. And I know that you do a lot of like streaming of these types of games, and
Hmm.
are just generally fascinated by them. And I was wondering, like, was that just all stemmed from your childhood and growing up playing them? Does some of it have to do with preservation? What's kind of the fascination with these this older kind of EGA text parser style?
The fascination for me for the adventure game genre in particular was that I really loved. I still do. I mean, I was a big bookworm when I was a kid, and I love setting and story and dialogue and all those things. And adventure games at the time, I mean, I think nowadays modern games have a lot to do in terms of like character and plot and everything. But like back in the day, you either had like something that had like no story, no characters, no setting. Really, it's kind of all like eye hand coordination, twitch reflexes, and things like this. Adventure games were the genre that did have this focus on story and this focus on problem solving in ways that weren't like just shooty type of problem solving or staying alive
Yeah,
for as long as possible type of problem solving. And that really appealed to me as a kid. And when I first saw King's Quest One, the first adventure game I'd ever played, I was immediately struck by how different it was from all the other games I'd played up to that point. It was a world you could walk around with multiple screens and you can be in this environment and you could play the game. But I think a lot of the time when I was playing, the King's Quest games or adventure games, it's just this is I can walk around in this world and I can interact, typing words into a parser and taking a look around and all these other things. And that was what really stuck with me, I think, with adventure games, and that's why I stuck with the genre through just playing the genre I played the most, the genre I enjoyed the most. And when I started to think about making possibly a game, which happened in a kind of like a roundabout way, which we will get into. When I started to think about it, I didn't even have to think about what kind of game would I want to make because I already knew I would love to tell a story. I want to tell a story with this particular medium, and the best way that I can think of, and even like the simplest way to do it, would be with an adventure game.
yeah, that's a very succinctly, I think, and well said as far as like the uh, just the how special the genre is, and I
Mm-hmm.
think in particular it's wild that it still stands out as that here in 2026, just like it did, back when you were playing them as a kid, where it's like there are obviously way more narrative driven and like interesting takes on video games these
Mm-hmm.
days, but it's wild how often the interaction with the environment is through shooting or through kind of
Well,
attacks
exactly.
or what have you.
Yeah.
And so being able to, yeah, kind of thoughtfully just steep in an environment, especially one
Yes.
that's so beautifully illustrated, I think is one of the things that definitely fascinates me as well about them. And it sounds like that was core to the Crimson Diamond's creation.
Absolutely, absolutely. But yeah, you mentioned this idea that so many. It's almost like we get used to this idea in modern games where the story is there and you get a story. And you often get quite a good story, but there's other things you're required to do to progress through the game that aren't to do
Right.
with the story. Like you have to shoot up a boss, or you have to get capture a flag, and it's so separate to me. I never got used to that idea of needing to do those other things that I'm actually maybe not even coincidentally. I just never got good at those things in games.
Sure.
And so this idea of like I cannot get more of the story until I get better at those other aspects of the games, which I'm not really good at. And so I'm not going to get any further in this game because of that. But what's great about adventure games is that you don't have to be good at other things like shooting people and things like this in order to get to do the whole story. And I think that's a part of the adventure game genre that I do find very appealing to me is there is no other mechanic that it's going to get in my way of enjoying what I want to enjoy.
Yeah. Again, very well said. Well, the vibe of the Crimson Diamond is, as I said, like you can tell it's made by someone who has such a reverence for the genre, and it's super well done and perfect for that idea of like steeping and just
Mm-hmm.
being there and soaking it all in. And I think a lot of it has to do with the color palette, and of course its technical inspirations. As far as like the technical capabilities of the computers that were playing these early text parsers. But it's also incredibly written, with elements of like mystery novels and history, which we'll get into a little bit later. But I was wondering, like, as we get into the story, what were some inspirations as far as games? You mentioned King's Quest already, and
Mm-hmm.
literature, movies, what have you.
Yeah, I have always loved like mystery stories. I think that comes when I talk about this about how the Crimson Diamond came to be. I talk about how um, it's kind of like I got it from like both sides of my family. Like from my dad. My dad was the early adopter who had brought computers into the home, and my sister and I would use word processors for our homework, and we were the first, almost the first kids in our school to do that. From my mom, I get this love of mystery novels. Like when she first came to Canada, she was reading Agatha Christie mystery novels. She still has like a really beautiful collection of vintage Agatha Christie novels.
Oh, I
From
love
her
that.
also. We would watch Columbo as a family, so these types
Mine
of
too.
things. Oh, really? Oh, Columbo's the
Yeah.
best. I cannot.
Yeah.
We could talk for like an hour just about Columbo. But yeah, from her, and then from that, my sister also. We all like I would read her Hardy Boys books, her Nancy Drew, Encyclopedia Brown, these things called Usborne Puzzle Adventures, which were this kind of a really great combination of like problem solving, like visually, and like code breaking and all these other things with really cool illustrations.
Oh, cool.
All of that was a combination of stuff that I like enjoyed as a kid. And so having enjoyed it as a kid and wanting to put everything that I like and am interested or even have a passing interest in, which we'll kind of get into when it comes to the geology and mineralogy aspect of it.
Yeah.
Everything that I've always been super interested in, I was already very familiar with that stuff because I'd been enjoying that stuff for many, many years. I kind of just wanted to cram it all in one place and kind of synthesize it into this one thing that would be its own thing and stand on its own. And that's kind of how the inspirations and continue to inspire me for my next projects. I have a BritBox subscription. I've watched tons of like mystery and crime shows and things like that. So, in the way that it's entertainment for me, but it's also research at the same time.
Yeah, which is the best kind. I feel
Yes.
like my interest in like mystery and crime shows and books has always like it's had me like writing little short stories or what have you to make it feel like that, where it can it can be both research for the creative process and
Well, yeah.
just
I
fun.
have this Google Doc on my phone where if I'm watching a show and an idea comes to me, then I'm like I just open the Google Doc, I jot it down, I go on with my day, and I've got it's like this vast document of like ideas of things that have occurred to me or things that I've learned that that's something I would love to incorporate into some kind of another game that I might want to make. It's never
Yeah.
ending. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so cool to me, just a little digression into the genre. It's cool to me that like those Agatha Christie stories, or even before with like Wilkie Collins, like the first detective stories,
Hmm.
they're like, and detective stories coming out now, on Peacock or whatever. Like they all kind of follow a similar loop, and it's one of
Hmm.
like the most well trodden genres, it feels like,
Hmm.
but it's
Hmm.
one that's still fascinating to so many people and kind of never gets old. And it's something about like, I don't know what it is for me that does it. It might be about like truth, or like there being an answer, in quotation
Hmm.
marks, or what have you, or
Yes.
like the depravity of the human mind. I don't know, but it really can continue to fascinate. And I think the Crimson Diamond is a great entry in the mystery canon.
Thank
Speaking
you.
of mystery, so adventure games, and particularly ones that are centered around like mysteries or puzzle solving, I think oftentimes like the older ones were known for being very opaque
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes, kind of soft locking as far as not
Mm-hmm.
being able to progress through something if you don't type in the right words or know what to interact with. And I thought the Crimson Diamond did a great job. And one of its modern elements was like balancing that as far as like the accessibility for folks like me who aren't as used to kind of working through text parser puzzles and still feeling like some of the entries it was inspired by. And that kind of brought me to a specific question about like hint books.
Mm-hmm.
Because the Crimson Diamond has a hint book that you can click and it'll open up in a browser right next to it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very easily accessible. And I was wondering, like, what inspired you to include such an accessible hint book, and what roles do hint books play in text parser adventure games in your mind?
Yeah, the impetus for including like launching the game with the hint book that launches in browser, it was really important to me because text parser adventure games like that's it. It's not something you see very much commercially released anymore,
Yeah.
and I knew that that was going to be a bit of an uphill battle to get people to potentially try something that they'd never seen before, or just return to this idea of, yeah, those games, if you even have a memory of those games and if you play them, you might remember, yeah, they can be really tough. They can be kind of merciless when it comes to the game design of them. And it was really important to me to be like a good ambassador for this type of gameplay, in that I really wanted whoever came to this game, whether you come to this with nostalgia or you're coming to this completely fresh, I wanted people to have a good experience with it. And I knew that the text parser interface, it's got some friction to it. It's definitely requiring you to be more engaged with the content than you might otherwise be. Like, for instance, in a point and click adventure game, that's a big ask, and I wanted to have that so in case people do get stuck, there's just so much competition for people's attention nowadays when it comes to games, that if someone gets stuck and then they just will like go away from your game, they'll just never come back.
Yeah.
And I wanted people to get to experience the full story of it. That was something that was important to me. And additionally, I mean, also practically speaking, for people who were reviewing the game as well. I mean, I wanted them
Mm.
to be able to get through the game as well to see to see it in its entirety. That was the main thing about making the hint book something that anyone could access. Yeah, because talking about those older games and how difficult they were, I I have lots of memories about being incredibly stuck with them, and I think there's a lot of it has been made about this idea that people they were selling hint books and they were making these games, difficult on purpose to sell hint books. Now I'm not sure how
I
much
see.
truth. I don't know how much truth there is to that, honestly, but all I can say is that in the intervening many years since when those games kind of had their heyday, like that particular style, like that text parser in particular EJ palette, like between like late '80s, early '90s, we're talking like a 3, possibly 4 year period where that was kind of like the thing, and it's kind of like the height of technology at the time. At that time, we're still kind of figuring this stuff all out. And
Mm.
when I do stream, also I stream retro games, and it's a really good education to see like this figuring out process of like what's working, what's not, and that could be something that's generally true, or that could be something more like individually true for my own personal taste. And kind of revisiting those older games was a great lesson as I was designing the Crimson Diamond, because it made me really appreciate what they were doing that I liked, but also made me pay attention to what the stuff was that I didn't like and try to smooth over those aspects of it. And so I had all this, the benefit of all those years of experience that other people have done for my own design to say, well, yeah, I want to make this something that's going to play a bit smoother, that you're not going to have soft locks. You're not going to have, hopefully, the text parser is going to be a bit more flexible than what they had in the past. And those are stuff that I did want to improve upon for the Crimson Diamond.
Yeah, and just digging in there a little bit, like obviously you had a facility with the genre and experience with the genre, but when it came to designing, your own puzzles for your own game, what was kind of the trial and error process
Mhm.
like as far as finding that balance of, allowing the character or the player to explore and kind of enjoy a bit of friction, but
Mhm.
trying to make sure they don't get too discouraged?
The the text parser I knew was going to be friction no matter what, which
Yeah.
meant that when I was actually designing the game, this. I don't know if anyone's going to believe me when I say this, but I wanted to make the game as easy as possible, which with taking into account the fact that there is a text parser game, which is already raising the bar of difficulty a little bit. I did want to make the game easy as possible. And what I mean by that is when I wanted the puzzles to have logic in them. I wanted there to be uh, like indications or hints or kind of multiple ways for the player to kind of get prodded into like paying attention to something, for instance, that kind of thing. I really and I think for the most part it does play fairly smoothly. There are a couple of puzzles that are a little bit harder, a little bit more involved than others. But for those ones, I try to kind of give them multiple solutions
Yeah.
to increase the chance that the player would actually hit upon one of those multiple solutions that would actually work for them. But a lot of it was me just saying, well, logically, what needs to happen here in order for the player to achieve what they need to achieve? I didn't go out of my way to make something that was illogical or like moon logic, as they say, something that wasn't going to make any sense whatsoever. Because that's not something I like either in my games. For the most part, for me, adventure games are that enjoyment of the setting and the story, and not so much about the actual puzzles. Like I know other people have different opinions about that, but that's just how I approach it. But just so happens that when you're creating a game like this, when there are these obstacles to overcome, that sometimes people get really stuck on something, and sometimes people won't, and that can be hard to balance as well. But what really helped me was watching people stream, something like the demo or showing it at events and seeing where people were having their trouble, and then trying to, fix the game to make it so that those parts that were just a little bit bumpier were a bit more smoothed out.
Yeah, I was going to ask, just peeling back the curtain, about like the testing process, because it
Mm.
seems like, to me, when I'm writing something, for instance, something can really make sense in my mind and feel logical. And then someone will read it and be like, what are you talking about here?
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine working on a game solo, it can only, that definitely can be the process. So how much were you working with testers kind of behind the scenes, or was it mainly you observing folks playing stuff like the demo and public demonstrations, or what was the balance there?
I did have a wonderful group of testers with me. Not a lot of testers. I would say there's definitely, maybe like less than 10 people who were very active in helping me test. And it was mostly for bug stuff.
Hmm.
It's actually surprisingly well, I mean, I'm such a rookie programmer that I'm not surprised that most of it was actually just bugs. But I was kind of surprised that not a lot of it was to do with like what the logic of the game was, or the lack of logic of the game.
Yeah.
So I feel like I probably did a pretty good job with that aspect of it. Occasionally, there's actually an interesting story a bit later on, like after the game was released. There's a part there's a part in the game where it used to be you could confront a character about something and give a lot of evidence, and nothing bad would happen to you.
Hmm.
And I had got a couple bits of feedback saying, well, I don't understand why I confronted this. And this is them saying this, like they did this action of they confronted this person unwisely and no consequence happened. And so that was an example of something where, okay, logically, I'm like, yeah, logically it does make sense that something bad probably should happen to you if you confront this particular character. And so if for a subsequent patch, I added a part where if you did confront that character about unwisely about this evidence that you found, then you do get like a one of the deaths in the game.
Hmm.
That was one of the few examples I can think of off the top of my head where someone gave me feedback about the actual like logic of what's happening in the game, and I was happy to add that for them because yeah, it does make sense, and I do try to take into account all of the feedback that I get and then evaluate whether it's something. Not only is it something that makes sense to me, but if it's actually something I can technically do, because someone for me for being such a newbie programmer. There's a lot that I am just not able to do. For example, stuff like arcade sequences in games, which I know are very controversial. That was not even a consideration for me to include because I just have no idea how to do that. So no one has to worry. No arcade sequences in my games.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's a cool marriage between, as you say, kind of just the technical limitations of
Mm-hmm.
ability in like, I
Yes.
guess what some people could see as like a style choice. And that's
Yes,
what like,
exactly.
that's one of the fascinating things in games to me is like, since the genre is just so broad and gets broader
Mm-hmm.
every day, it seems, game developers, in quotation marks, like run the gamut from like folks who are doing art and making text parsers and that's what they do, to making first person shooters and they don't care about story, and anywhere in between. And I
Yeah.
don't know, it's a fascinating thing to think about, that they're all grouped in a way. And I wanted to talk about the Crimson Diamond as a very Canadian game,
Hmm.
mainly in terms of its setting,
Hmm.
as in this fictional town of Crimson, and in a time period that was, for someone like me, who obviously I'm in the U.S. and mainly studied U.S. history
Hmm.
in school, like there's a lot of references to things that I wasn't familiar with. And I was wondering, like, what was the importance of bringing kind of this historical perspective, this Canadian perspective, to life while making the game? Did those details feel necessary to include just based on the setting? Was it like a part that you wanted to particularly tease out? And what was the research process like?
It was definitely really important to me to do that research, and I think earlier on we talked about how I put all my interests into this game. Like I love this, especially with the mystery genre, of everything that I kind of absorbed about mysteries and what I like about them, and kind of putting it into the game. But I also took the opportunity with the research for the Crimson Diamond to delve further into stuff that I was kind of interested in, that I hadn't really taken as much time to explore as I would. And one of those things is, yeah, the history, the historical aspect. Of course, yeah, I did go to school. I grew up in Canada, so we did have Canadian history, but it had been some time since I had taken a Canadian history course. And there's some things we didn't even really talk about in my history courses when I was in school. Stuff like, yeah, the treaties and the land, and how the government treated the First Nations people, all those things. It was touched upon, but it wasn't really gone into with any amount of detail. And I knew that when I was doing the research for the game and the setting, and when I hit upon the time period that I wanted to set this game in, it was so important to me to include those things, because that was a huge part of the government's policies, and what drove people to settle in particular places. And in a place like, for instance, in Crimson, that was a very common story when it came to settlement in Ontario. This idea that the government was incentivizing settlers to go out into these lands. And they would even give you free land if you stuck around for like 3 years or 5 years or something. You could just have it if you just worked it.
Right.
Um, all that stuff was super important to me and super interesting to me. And I would say that in terms of the issues, I also got an Indigenous cultural sensitivity consultant, Sonia Ballantyne, to help me with that aspect of it too. Because there's a whole part of the story that I am not really qualified to tell on my own. And her being a Swampy Cree, and I've got a character in my game, Nathan Cardinal, he was Cree, not Swampy Cree, but Cree. She was able to really give me some really compelling like accounts of how it was seen from the other perspective, not from the perspective of the settlers, but from the people that were being settled upon, and how they
Yeah.
felt about it, and with the kinds of community and the kind of relationships that you would build with the settlers. And she gave me a lot of really good feedback about that. And for example, the Nathan Cardinal sprite, I used to have like moccasins on.
Hmm.
So he had the moccasins and he had the beads and everything like this, and the fringe jacket. And she said, could we maybe do a thing where his boots are like European style boots, to show the trading that would happen between, for the First Nations people and the settlers. And I thought that was a really good idea. And I actually put you can even ask him about his boots and things like this, and he'll tell you about his historical relationship with the Richards family that settled in that area, and how they did become friends. Because another thing that was really what she really emphasized to me was, it was hard living to live out in those areas, especially for people like the settlers who didn't have any experience with that type of stuff. And so, yeah, you'd have a lot of First Nations people helping, and then you would make friends. Like, it was all about survival. And at that time, even for the First Nations people, if it was a particularly super harsh winter or something, survival was really difficult, which meant that you're gonna get along, you're gonna cooperate with the people that are around you, because it's about getting through that tough time, and then you bond with these people. And so there was that type of relationship that could become very close between the settlers and the First Nations, and that aspect was something else I also did include in the game, in terms of the friendship that Evan Richards and Nathan Cardinal have, and how their families had, all down through the decades. And it was an incredible experience for me to get to hear those stories and get that to improve and enrich the game in a way that I could not get from a historical textbook. Um, I found that really a really beautiful way to include a part of a story that I wouldn't have gotten otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, you said it, and it's one of the things that honestly it kind of breaks my heart with the like how little support there is for like indie developers or just independent creators of any media these days, is that like the onus is still on them to like pay for consultants or folks who are
Mm-hmm.
able to help tell, more detailed
Mm-hmm.
stories. And I think folks who don't have, the bandwidth or resources or ability to contact someone like that for whatever reason, like usually just end up leaving those parts out to like remain
Yeah, yeah,
politically correct.
yeah.
And not only does that lead to obviously like less interesting textured stories, but it leads to, the folks who are creating telling the stories that they feel like their identity, I guess allows them to create
Mm-hmm.
or gives them sanction to, when usually, especially history, if we're telling historical tales, are so much more textured and detailed. So I'm really glad that you spoke to that. And speaking of details, as an environmental studies major back in university, it meant a lot to me to see. Is the first time since my my university days that I heard mention of the Mohs hardness scale, which is a geological concept. Um, and you go into a ton of geological detail as well. And I was wondering, like, perhaps it's a similar ethos as far as like being thorough, but what made you to decide to kind of include these details in Nancy's investigatory journey? um, Obviously Nancy is, a geologist by trade working at a museum, but like why was it important to you to include these kind of hard geological details rather than glossing over the scientific elements? Because you could tell the same story without mentioning, this is how the Mohs hardness scale works, and we're going to like scrape rocks on this plate, and this is how they're going to be identified.
The geology and the mineralogy aspects of it was another example of stuff that I already had an interest in, but I hadn't really taken the time to go deep into that interest. And because of the Crimson Diamond, I got this opportunity to learn a lot more about that stuff and actually become an even bigger hobbyist when it came to that, like rock collecting and going places to actually go on tours and collect minerals and all these things. It's really enhanced my life outside of games, in that it encourages me to do these tours or go to talks or go to like this Bancroft Jamboree that we have in Ontario every year, that a bunch of different vendors come from all over the place and sell like samples and collections and things like this.
Oh, cool.
It's a wonderful way for me to get to explore those interests and stuff like the Mohs hardness scale. And not only the Mohs hardness scale, but by extension, like this kit, like this mineralogist kit that Nancy has to improvise during the course of the game.
Yeah.
These types of things are kind of very like adventure game tropey kind of things, where you have to like improvise tools to perform an action because you don't have the actual proper tool. I think there's a lot of like adventure game puzzles that are kind of like that. But this idea that you have these tools that help you understand the world better, and that these are tools that you would have to understand the real world better, and these are the tools that you use in game to understand the game world better. And it felt like this natural extension of of just the problem solving that would happen in a game. And not only that, when I think about games that I've played or books that I've read, as a kid, there's so much learning you can do kind of tangentially to the actual story that you might be reading, if it's something that is well fleshed out and everything. I think a lot of us have acquired over the years like this, whether it's completely true or not, knowledge about, certain facts or certain parts of the world and all these things that you just kind of accumulate over time when you consume a lot of media. And I like the idea that people can take that same type of lesson from the kind of game that I'm making, even though it's not expressly an educational game, but by virtue of the fact that I wanted to do all this this research and include all in the research in a way that is interactive for the player and meaningful for the player, then maybe they can come away with this having learned a little bit about rocks and geology and that type of thing, or at least this enthusiasm for learning that Nancy brings to the game. Just that in general, if you can kind of come away with it with something like that, and this eagerness to dive into something that you might have a passing interest in.
Yeah. And I think that was really well said about how, we kind of can learn so much just tangentially from like things that when we pick them up, we're not thinking of. So like whether it's a horror book and then you learn a lot about fishing, or,
exactly.
a crime novel and you learn a lot about whatever, psychology. It's again, one of the things that like fascinates me so much about the Crimson Diamond is like you did all of this extra research and took that extra step, which I think is what creates the most immersive and like generous fiction. When you didn't have to tell the mystery story at the big mansion. Other creators could have just told it and it could have been Hardy Boys and it would have been fine. But this was way better. And I was wondering, obviously we've talked about a lot of intentional choices so far. I was wondering in particular about the sound design for the game, because I realized while playing it, like I had to check a couple of times if like my headphones were correctly connected, because I was like, I'm pretty sure there's just, you're just walking around and it's quiet. And there are some, environmental sounds going on as far as like birds chirping or, that's a generic example. And then sometimes when you discover something, there's a little theme that's played. And during the cutscenes, there's this period style music, which I really love. But it's very sparse, the sound design. Yes. And so I was wondering, like, was this to mirror the game's, inspirations, or, take inspiration from other text parsers when, the capabilities of sound were more limited? Or was there another reason for this choice?
There are a lot of reasons why I chose to do it that way. Primarily, I would say that it was because at the time, with those technological limitations, like sound takes up a lot of like a lot of data space, and so a lot of those games had no music, and they had like these little musical stings here and there. And when I was a kid and I was playing these games, I didn't think about that at all. I was just kind of experiencing these games as they were, and I think it appealed to me, though, this meditative silence that was punctuated by these little sounds when something would happen in the game, because I find, at least, and this is where it comes into personal preference. So there's like a crossroads of many things, like this intersection of the style of the kind of game that this game is recalling, which is this very particular era, like this 1989-ish era, where they didn't have any voice acting, certainly, and they didn't have very much music to speak of. What that did for me was, it kind of gave me this feeling that of these games in general kind of being these meditative experiences where there was a lot of silence. And I can't say whether or not that developed into my later preference for not really liking to have wall-to-wall music in games that I'm even watching other people stream. Sometimes I'll be watching other people stream a game and there's it's just music the whole time, and I can find it really kind of overwhelming, especially if it's very repetitive. And I much prefer that silence when it comes to it, versus, and so I can't tell you whether or not, as a child, having experienced all that silence in my games, that's why I grew up to be an adult that prefers there be more sparse music than someone who just enjoys like that wall to wall ambient music. But I can just say that is my preference. That's also this idea of wanting to recreate that style, but also it kind of like budgetarily as well, I would say. There is like more than 40 minutes of music in the game, but it just kind of, it's not throughout the entire thing. Yeah. But it would just be a matter of like, the musician I was working with, Dan, it's just like Dan worked with me, and I just like, how much music can I really, ask Dan to create for me for this project that I'm making? Then, he doesn't, this is my first project, who knows how this is going to go. So it was a matter of, can I ask Dan to give me 2 hours of music? I don't think so. Right. So this idea of, so there was that limitation as well in terms of Dan's time, because Dan is a busy person. He composes for other games. He's like touring the world with with Sean Paul with his band. He's been doing that for more than 15 years. Like that's his main gig. He's got a lot of stuff going on. I can't really impose upon him for like so much more music than what I already asked him for. So there's a lot of reasons why there was very sparse usage of music in the game, but primarily I will say it was because I really wanted to recreate the feel of those games, and I actually really enjoy the feel of those games.
Yeah. And it's cool, again, like a limitation, a stylistic choice, and the inspiration are kind of coming together to create what is a very
Yeah.
unique choice, and one that I think fits the vibe. And it allows you to, I think, focus on the details, which are important, and focus on, the visuals, and to almost isolate that sense, of sight instead of having the hearing be kind of front and center all the time, is really impactful, and meditative, as you said.
Uh, I
Yeah.
guess another aspect of it is because so Dan also used this synth called the Roland MT32. Like he actually used an actual Roland MT32 synth to compose the music, and so the music is also, in terms of the instrumentation that you have available to you, is somewhat limited. In that, okay, maybe if you had like full realistic sounding instruments and all that, you can do more nuance with the music that you'd produce. But the Roland MT32 is like it's very like pingy and beepy and stuff. And so you probably don't want that type of music the whole time through your
Right.
game, because that would probably get annoying really fast. But if it was a game that had, we could do some restrained, strings here and there, like a whisper of violin or something. Like, you can't do that with Roland MT32. It's like it's just like with the graphics, it's very like bright, poppy sound.
Yeah.
And I think that would probably also get pretty old quickly.
Yeah. And I think that's, something I compared to in writing the question was like how the graphics and the sounds are similar in a way, in that they're sparse but very bright, as you said. And it's interesting that you were able to make, I mean, I think it speaks to your art training and how good you are at it, that you were able to make such a bright and punchy color palette feel, sparse at moments, and, come in with a lot of highlights in others. I want to talk about something we talked about off air, where you asked me what my experience with text parsers was in the past, and the answer was pretty limited. And designing puzzles for folks like me who you wanted to bring in with the game. In particular, I wanted to talk about this example with an ice box, and
Mhm.
not to spoil too much, but basically, like, there's a puzzle where, for someone like me who never has, had experience with
Yes.
an ice box, I didn't live during this
Yeah.
time where they were often used. In the kitchen, it just looks maybe like a locker, or you're not really
Mhm.
sure what exactly it is. And so in order to solve the puzzle, you would first need to know that it's there. And then
Mhm.
you would need to know kind of like what about it is going on. And so as you were talking about, pointing people toward a clue in multiple areas, you
Mhm.
have the look function where you can look at the room
Mhm.
and it'll tell you that it's there. You have a visual cue that something is melting out of the bottom of it, so you can
Mhm.
see like a little a puddle. And then you
Mhm.
also have text that you can talk to someone,
Mhm.
and he mentions that there's something to do with ice.
Yes.
And so I was just wondering, like, what were kind of some strategies you use, outside of the things we've already talked about, to make the game feel accessible, particularly to players who aren't used to using the text parser, and who might, as you've discussed, like, feel a little impatient when it comes to like getting stuck or not knowing what to do next.
That is part of the joy, and also like the incredible amount of labor involved when you kind of are a soloish developer, as I am, where I made every aspect of it except for the music. Dan Pollocker did the music, but you can solve those problems or approach them in all those different ways simultaneously, which
Yeah.
is great. I mean, so you mentioned, yeah, that there's the writing aspect, there's this the art aspect where it's like, yeah, it's completely off to the side, it's a different color. There's a state change in it, like in from chapter 1, there's no puddle, and chapter 2, the puddle appears. That you
Yeah.
then you to call your attention to it. And then, you can talk to Jack about, if you just talk to Jack generically in chapter 2, he will mention the icebox. Like those are so many different ways to kind of point the player toward something that might be useful or might be helpful in the game at that particular time for the game. And I try to do that in every other, well, not every other, but in a lot of other places when it comes to calling attention to something where maybe that thing has changed from one chapter to the other. Maybe someone's going to mention it. Maybe visually it stands out in the first place. All those things are ways that I wanted to kind of call attention to something, or like repeatedly saying something. And for example, in chapter 1, when you first are introducing yourself to the other characters in the lodge, it was really important for me to get the player to understand like who you are and what you're doing there. Because I think what can happen with adventure games, sometimes you're like, I don't know who I am. I don't know what my goal is. And so I kind of went over the top with it at the start of the game, where you literally, like, I think 8 or 9 times you're introducing yourself to people and telling them why you're there. And by that time, hopefully they have got the point of like, okay, this is who I am. This is where I work. And this is my goal. Like my overarching goal in the game is going to be this. So that it started that way, where I think the rest of the game doesn't have nearly that much repetition in it, but I think it is important to have some aspect of repetition across visually, writing, state changes, all these things, to help the player like kind of steer them toward what they probably should pay attention to at this stage of the game. And if that doesn't work, then we can always fall back on the hint book.
There's always the hint book.
There's always the hint book. And how often did you use the hint book, may I ask?
I would say pretty sparingly, but there definitely were so I'm glad you asked this, because I'm not sure I wrote a question down, but I did want to talk about it. So I used it probably on two kind of like story locking puzzles, I would say, where I was just like, I don't know what to do. And I needed it. But then, at the end, and we'll talk about some of the multiple ending stuff going on, but when you're kind of getting quizzed and you're getting scored, or not scored necessarily, but kind of told what you missed or what you could go back and look at for your next playthrough, I actually use the hint book a little then, not seeing the answers as much, but looking at kind of the different prompts that you wrote in, as far as when you're trying to do this, when you're trying to do that. And there were some that I had not even thought of doing, or had no idea that I could do. And it opened my mind to your philosophy behind this game, which was not, I don't want to say it's make the world feel like, real life, because there's no real way to do that within the bounds. But it was kind of, as you've already described, make everything that you could logically think to do within the environment doable. And it kind of blew my mind in looking at the hint book after the fact and seeing that there was so much more to the 6 or 7 hours that I had played.
Nice.
Yeah. And so, yeah.
I guess, sorry, to interject really quick before I lose this thought, I guess that's another reason why I wanted the hint book to be included upon launch for the game, is I did want people to, if they're not privy to it through their own playthrough, to see all the work that I did.
Yeah.
That they can, if they missed it, then they can, oh yeah, okay, look, there's all this stuff that is going on here that I might not have caught myself. So I guess there is that aspect of it. Well, look at all the work I did.
Yeah. I mean, it's even as just an exercise in just a short imaginative exercise of thinking about the creation of the game. It is staggering, because I would walk through and I would just do the things that I was, thinking would progress the story. And even that, I was wow, having tried my hand at poking around in Adventure Game Studio and in PowerQuest, it's this is just an earth-shattering amount of work. And then you go back and you look at all the things you could have done, and it's wow, there's 4 other games here that I wasn't playing. So kudos to you. I think another thing for me, at least someone with less experience with the genre, that felt like pushing it forward, and maybe this was inspired by games in the past that I just hadn't played, were the small cutscenes you built in for Nancy to listen in on other characters' conversations, which happens pretty often. and how you gain some information, particularly for these like little side quests that you can do that aren't necessary for completion of the main story.
Mm-hmm.
But I was wondering, like, what inspired you to build these into the game? Because you get a new kind of angle for art, and a new way to kind of gain information outside of the text parser.
I was definitely inspired by the games that had come before. For instance, the primary inspiration for the Crimson Diamond is the Colonel's Bequest,
Mm.
which is an EGA, that 16 color palette, text parser mystery adventure game. Also, it had a sequel called The Dagger of Amon Ra that was like a different, it was like more point and click. It was a VGA game, so like 256 colors, not the 16 colors. But both of them, I actually took a lot of inspiration from both of those in that eavesdropping aspect of it, where you do get a different perspective on the game. Which I do think is important because, yeah, like you said, like when you change the perspective, it's like it gets people to like maybe sit up and pay attention because you've changed what they're looking at in a way that if you get really used to like that particular sprite moving around in that particular background, all of a sudden you're treated to something completely new. So it does make you perk up a bit and pay attention. But also it's to do with, I think, like that limitation of this low resolution screen that we're working with. And the Crimson Diamond is a 320 by 200 pixel game, which is hilariously small when it comes to in comparison to modern games. I love that low resolution aspect of it. But what happens with it is you kind of are very limited in terms of the type of expressiveness you can bring to the characters' faces, and that's not even necessarily a bad thing because as you walk Nancy around the lodge and you see her little sprite face, it's quite blank. But then people are projecting their own feelings or their own ideas about how she would be reacting onto that face. And I think there is something to be said for that. But when that's not going to really do the trick, there are speech portraits. So when Nancy is talking and other characters are talking, you get a close-up look of what their face would look like had you had a higher resolution game.
Yeah.
And that gives you more information about the type of person that character is, like how they're talking, like their mood, are they nice or mean or friendly or however they're feeling, the state of their mind currently. You can get a better insight into that when you have the speech portraits. And the same can be said for those eavesdropping sections where you do kind of get, sometimes you do get like a more close-up version of the people. So you get an idea of, what do these people look like more versus the 10 pixels that are usually their face. And I do like that in terms of taking something that is a limitation of like, well, we don't really know what their faces look like to, okay, well, here is this thing that does, again, in so many ways. And a lot of these design decisions are there's multiple reasons for these design decisions, and in this case, it is to give you a better look at the people that you're dealing with here, but also this change of perspective that is going to be like, oh, there's something new and interesting happening. So for those are the two main reasons why I wanted to have that change of perspective when it comes to the eavesdropping sections.
Yeah, I wonder if just hearing a lot of the answers to my questions be like, yes, it was, somewhat my own choice, but a lot of it was just what I had learned playing these games that I love. Yep. I wonder how much of and this is something that I'm sure it's impossible to quantify, but it's like, I wonder how much for players like me who don't have as much of a facility with the genre, those elements that for you are like, like that was done in that was done in the Colonel's Bequest, or that was done in the Dagger of Amon Ra, and that for us is like mind blowing, like, wow, this is so cool, or like how'd they choose to do that. It's cool that the Crimson Diamond is, for a lot of people like me, the first exposure to text parsers in a full game, but it's like, as we've talked about a lot in this interview, also introducing folks to a lot of, it sounds like, the notable elements from other text parser games. I think that's beautiful.
Thank
and
you.
really important for like preservation, which is something that I'm thinking more and more about, the wilder technology gets and proprietary things get. I know that the Crimson Diamond started out as a series of like sketches you were doing for yourself, and then you started working on it as a hobby, and then eventually you switched to working on it full time before its release in August 2024. What did you learn from this development process, and what was kind of what was going through your head as you progressed from like just kind of on a lark to a hobby to a full-time thing?
It was definitely a whole long journey when it comes to it. I think Yeah, when it started out, as I mentioned, yeah, sketches. So it's like this. It was started as pixel art rooms. I was an artist first, and so I was just experimenting with the medium of pixel art, and that was what it was at the very, very beginning, before it was ever going to be a game. Was this idea of pixel art rooms? But I approached the pixel art rooms just as, even if that was just going to be pixel art rooms with no game associated with it. That's where the research actually started for it, because coming from this idea of, okay, well, I'm an illustrator, and I know that when I'm making illustration, I need to do a lot of reference, and I need to get, a lot of research. I need to get a lot of reference photos, because it's just not a matter of, I'm going to put a couch in this room. You can't just say that. I mean, you have to say, well, what kind of couch is it? Like,
Yeah.
what, and that's you're gonna have to answer a lot of questions before you can answer the question of what kind of couch it is, because you're like, well, where is this? Like, in what part of the world is this? That's going to make a difference about what kind of couch it's going to be. What shape is the couch is going to make a difference in terms of what time period we're in that particular part of the world. There's a lot of questions you have to answer, that is not just about, okay, I'm just going to put a couch somewhere.
Yeah.
And in all, like, the textiles and the rooms, and even the technology, like this idea of, like, what kind of stove is that? I mean, that's not the kind of stove we have nowadays. The fact that there's an ice box, you mentioned ice boxes haven't been a thing for quite some time. All those things are decisions that can only be made after you've done research into some kind of a setting. And as I was doing research about that, that's when these story ideas started to germinate, in terms of, well, where is this? When is it? Who lives here? Because that's also going to inform what kind of furniture there's going to be, what kind of rooms you're going to have in this place. And that's how the story started. And then from the story, then it grew eventually into a game, from, yeah, hobby for like a long period of time, because although Adventure Game Studio is a relatively easy in quotation marks, engine to learn in terms of making specifically an adventure game, like, it's right there in the name. There's still a lot of learning you have to do, and a lot of, like, getting stuck and asking people questions on, like, the forums or on Discord or something. So that just the practice of learning everything I needed to learn to barely finish a game, that took a long time.
Hmm.
And so and also because I was still being a freelance illustrator. I think my last freelance illustration commission was maybe 2019 or something. So all through, like, I started the Crimson Diamond, I think on my blog, the first pixel art rooms that I shared on my illustration blog at the time was like 2011 or 2013 or something. So from that time to, like, there was a lot of years in between there where I was learning and also still trying to be an illustrator. And then the illustration stuff started to fall away more as I started to get more traction for the game. I showed the game publicly for the first time in November 2018, and then 2019. By then I had, like, a website, and I had, like, a Facebook page for it, and all these things, and started to really start sharing it more frequently. Um, and then when I started to share them more frequently, what actually ended up happening was I'd get people approaching me asking me if I wanted to do, like, contract work for them, like pixel art. And that's how I got connected with Oliver Nelson Jr. and Strange Scaffold. So this was during the development cycle of the Crimson Diamond. I worked on a number of other games in terms of contract work, which did push back the launch date for the Crimson Diamond, but it was very, very valuable for me to get that experience, because I was learning how people made games, because that's something else I had no experience with. Like, not only did I have no experience programming, I didn't have experience about, yeah, what are the steps usually involved in making something like this. And so I learned a lot from watching Oliver Nelson Jr.'s practice and how he worked with his teams and things like that. And I also knew by that point that I really liked working in the games industry, and I wanted to hopefully, find a place for myself in this industry. Like, maybe I want to be a solo-ish game developer for as long as possible. But if that has to change in the future, like, I've worked with all these people. Hopefully, maybe there'd be something there for me there. But So yeah, from 2018, first show the game, and then I started to make more of it, and then spend more time with it, and gradually it came to a point where in 2022 I was at the point where I really wanted to finish the game. And by that time, I kind of said, I'm not going to take any more contracts on it. I'm going to do it full time. So only the last 2 years of its development was actually full time. The rest of it was all, yeah, like hobby, part time for the most part. And then just very, like, late in development did it actually end up being full time. So it was definitely a transition. And just learning about my own processes as I went, and especially as I'm starting on working on other projects of my own now, seeing worked for me really at that time, and what kind of instinctually I did, and trying to see like, well, was that the best way to do things? And sometimes it was, and sometimes it wasn't. That has been a real education for me too, because I'm still learning how I make games myself.
Yeah, that's really cool to hear, and I think it's something that is important to hear, particularly for folks who are like aspiring game developers or haven't made their game yet. As far as like, well, it seems like when we're being self-critical and self-conscious, it's like we have those who don't and those who are doing, and it's like we're so much closer, I think, just human beings are than, especially in today's day and age, we like imagine a lot of the time or perceive. So I think that's a really important note. And it leads me into my next question as far as like thinking along the timeline, because this is a question about the immense scope of the game where like if you play it like I did, play it all the way through 6 or 7 hours, and you're like, wow, that was like a good game, good mystery, and then you learn everything that you could have done. Like I said, it's kind of this mind-blowing moment, and I was wondering like, what made you decide to add in all that nuance and have it be, this, it's super extremely not linear. Like the story is, but like what you can do within the story is not. And I imagine that took just like so much more work. But then also like, where did that come in as far as the development timeline? Was that always the plan? Was that added in more in the 2 years you were working on it, just kind of head down? What was kind of the timeline as well?
I have to laugh a bit when you say like, oh, in terms of adding stuff in, that the idea of adding stuff, like adding more of like the branches and the more complexity and things like that. When the process was actually not, it was a bit more chaotic than just having making clear decisions about what I was going to add into the game.
Yeah.
Because I kind of approached it really organically. And I mentioned in terms of like learning how other people make games. The game is 7 chapters long. And I didn't actually have a design document until chapter 4. I was just making it all. It was all in my head, basically. And I was just kind of designing and organizing it chapter by chapter up to that point. But by chapter 4, things were getting sufficiently complicated that I could no longer just keep it in my head. It was really kind of frustrating to not be able to do that.
Yeah.
But the way that I designed the game overall was trying to think about, well, what makes sense for what makes sense in terms of what would happen, or what would make sense in what people would want to do, and what would make sense in terms of what people would end up doing. And there was a lot of possibilities there, and I'd want to explore those different possibilities. And without even thinking like, I'm going to add this other aspect, I'm going to add this other layer, it was all very organically generated in terms of, that's just the way I think when I'm just doing anything. Like if I'm planning for a trip, I think of, well, what do I need? What could happen? What do I need? What are eventualities I might need to prepare for? And I just think very logically in that way. And I approached the Crimson Diamond in the story very similarly. Well, like what could happen? This could happen, that could happen, that can happen. So I would want those to be things that could happen.
Yeah.
And what happens as you continue on in the story, it does start to compound in a way that is very exciting, but at the same time is very like labor intensive and hard to keep track of. But it was a matter of me being like, I need this to feel satisfying. I even in the smallest aspects of the game, where, for instance, like how you can sit down in a lot of the rooms, you can wash your hands, things like that. Like those are things you don't need to do in the game, but I needed them there because it needed to feel satisfying for me in terms of being a rich place where there's this possibility to do something. So I would want to accommodate the player's wishes, or accommodate the player's desires in this space. And the story was the same way in that, so it just ended up being as complicated as it was. And I like the fact that you did mention that it is a linear game in a way, but in a way that it's not. There's not a lot of branching in terms of stuff that you might choose to go down one path and you might not see all the other stuff going down another path.
Right.
The game branches like in literally chapter 7, I would guess. Like the very end of the game they're basically 2 endings and 1 bonus ending. But there's no actual branching up until that point, because I didn't want to work on like path, the left hand path, and then have everyone pick the right hand path and no one sees the left hand path. I didn't want that to be the type of non-linearity that I was going to be designing for. I wanted to design for like this idea that there is all this information happening around you and you might miss some stuff, but it's, it's not, you could hit everything, but you would have to be, I don't think anyone's hit everything the first time through, but it's not like choosing one path and going down that path all the way down. It's more like there's these little side things, and maybe you're going to see them and maybe you're not. And you're invited to come back and revisit them, but it's not like you've missed out on the primary game path to if you've missed those things. It's more like the quality of the information that you learn throughout the game. That's going to be dependent on how much you have seen or how much you figured out. So yeah, it's kind of a different way of approaching a game that is still quite linear, but at the same time, hopefully does have a bit of replay value. And actually, a lot of the reviews that I see do say that, yeah, I mean, you can see all the stuff that you've missed, and that kind of motivates you to want to go back. And that makes me really happy because that was my goal, is this idea of not wanting to spend all this time doing all these deep branches and things. And I get to focus on the assets that you're going to see for the most part are going to be the same everyone sees, but in terms of the quality of information that you receive will be different depending on what you do.
Yeah, well, it's wild because I generally perceive like adventure games to be the most, linear
Yes,
genre there is.
100%. Yeah.
And
yeah.
so then when it's like, it's almost, it's so different, but it's almost like Blueprints in that way, where it's like you can kind of just like explore these rooms. I mean, as you said, there's limits to it, but like, especially on a first playthrough and then going back and seeing all you've missed, it does feel like, wow, there's like, as I said, like 4 other games in here, or the world is so much bigger than I thought. And I think that's kind of the magic trick that's going on with the Crimson Diamond. A lot of the time playing it for me was like, there's a very limited number of screens, that you're walking to and walking within, and you're in this house, and that's mainly it. But just like the best, locked room mysteries or whatever, they're like very intimate, but like a lot of the possibility space is outside of the box, or like outside of what you might think on the surface. And I think that that's like what makes it not only a really, endearing nod to a lot of what inspired it sounds like, but just such a like rewarding game in and of itself. And yeah, I mean, I think that's a great last word on it from my perspective. I'm sure you would have a lot more to say, and so you're welcome back on the show anytime to talk about the Crimson Diamond. But I also played your delightful little Over the Garden Wall game on itch. It's called The Roundabout Orchard, and it's free there for folks to check out. I saw that it was commissioned by a cafe in Anaheim for like a Halloween event. Could you tell me more about that project just for a little bit?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. It's one of those things where, yeah, like so much of like the contract work that I got during the development time of the Crimson Diamond is stuff. It just so happened because I was sharing my work out there that I would have these other opportunities. And it's such a wonderful thing to just get the chance to work on something like this, because I remember when the Over the Garden Wall, when the show first came out, and I loved it. It was beautiful. So the fact that I actually got to work on an Over the Garden Wall game completely, I still cannot believe that happened. The way that it did happen was I was at an event. When was that? Was it like was that just 2025? Just last year? Was it just, it can't, no, it was just last year. That's crazy. Yeah. So just last year, I was at a couple like gaming events for, what I do. It's the Crimson Diamond stuff and things like this. And I met Derek Yu, who made Spelunky, who made UFO 50.
Yeah.
And, we just had a few short conversations and stuff. And then he had worked with the Requiem Cafe in Anaheim to do some, like, I think maybe a UFO 50 event. Because this cafe does a lot of these themed events around video games. And so they wanted to do an Over the Garden Wall event for Halloween. And he recommended me to the manager of the cafe to, approach me maybe about this commission. And I was 100% on board from the very beginning, because not only do I love the show, and I would have done it just for that reason, but they also had a connection to Patrick McHale, who was the creator of the show.
Yeah.
And we got to sit in on, we had like a nice video meeting where he talked about, the kind of the thoughts that he would have about what kind of game this could be, and they only really wanted something very small. I mean, they said in their brief, 15 to 20 minutes playthrough, and maybe like 2 to 3 backgrounds in total, like something very, very tiny. And the fact that I got to like have that meeting with, not only did I have that meeting with Patrick McHale, but he was actually much more involved than I'd actually ever really expect him to be for something like this. And it was incredible because I got to write those characters and write their voices, like Wirt and Greg. And I'd never had any experience writing other people's characters, in terms of trying to get like their voices right, their tone right, like what they would know, what they wouldn't know. And so I wrote a bunch of responses. Like, I don't know if you noticed this about the game, but because it's so small, every single different interaction has its own unique response.
Yeah.
And so if you click the trowel on the apple seed, it says one thing, but if you click the apple seed on the trowel, it says something else. So every single thing. So I did a lot of writing for it, and then the one of the proudest moments of my life was Pat saying that these do sound like the characters, and it's actually very funny.
Aww.
And so that made my life basically. And not only that, but he connected me to the Blasting Company, which is the band that composed the music for the show, and they composed 2 tracks for the game. And not only that, he connected with me with Elijah Wood, who recorded lines for the game that I wrote, which is also crazy. What an incredible opportunity to get to do. And also Lavon Jahanian, who was one of the background painters on the show, also did the backgrounds for the game.
Wow.
And my old college classmate Ilya Schwartz, he did the pixel animation for it as well. So it was just a wonderful bunch of people. This came all together in maybe 4 months maybe of work. I'd say very part-time on everyone's parts, and we just pulled together this tiny little thing that people got to enjoy. And it was such a pleasure to get to do, and such a dream to get to do. And it's all because I decided that I was going to make this thing called the Crimson Diamond and just share it. You just never know. So I know you say in terms of people who might want to make games and kind of are stopping themselves from doing it. I want to say you just never know what's going to come from sharing your work with other people. There's so much good that has come into my life from making this Crimson Diamond thing, and not letting my very limited programming knowledge stop me, or anything else stop me from doing it. Sometimes when I stream, I'll occasionally show bits of code when I'm streaming, or bits of my process when I'm streaming. And invariably someone in chat will say, wouldn't it be save you time if you did it this way or that way or the other way? And I'm like, absolutely, first of all, absolutely, you're probably 100% right when you're saying there are better ways to do this. But I want you to people to see how bad my code is and be inspired to not let that stop you, or lack of art experience to stop you. All the stuff you can learn as you go. And that learning part as you go is so rewarding, but also just connecting with other people who are kind of on that same journey as you, other people who want to make games, who are making games, who are sharing their work out there. You start to get to know those people, and it becomes this whole community. It becomes this whole network of friends and colleagues that you can have. It's been incredibly enriching for my life in a way that when I was a freelance illustrator, it just simply wasn't the same. It was much more isolating. Even though I am working from home on my own, the bulk of my time, I've made the most incredible friends, and gone to conferences and events and traveled and stuff, all because I decided I was going to make a thing and share it.
Yeah.
So I would recommend, if anyone is listening to this who is kind of on the fence about wanting to make something, and you have certain things that you think are stopping you, don't let those things stop you. Just go forward with it, and just ask for help. People are happy to give feedback and suggestions about what you can do. And that's something else that was a really big surprise for me when I was making the Crimson Diamond, is how helpful people are and how eager they are to help when they see that there's someone who's trying to make something and they're very passionate about it. Just asking for help and getting help has been another huge part of my life that I found has been enriching. It's been an enriching part of my life. And so when people ask me for help, I always try to help, give them suggestions, point them in the right direction, because we're all kind of in this together.
Such a refreshing and bright message. I almost want to end it there, but I won't, because it looks like you have some wonderful recommendations that I don't want to miss. Well, you stream, as you've mentioned, all sorts of fun, older, and esoteric games. I want you to recommend some games for my audience and I, but before you do that, could you say your handle, and because I want folks to watch your streams, because I've tuned into a couple and they're really wonderful. I'm going to keep doing that, and I hope some other
Oh,
folks will join me
thanks.
with that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay. Yeah, I stream on Tuesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on Twitch. My handle is _Maple Mystery. So you find me there.
Perfect.
I stream usually like art. I'm doing art right now for my little project I'm working on right now called The Deadly Bluff. I've been working on background art for that on stream. I also play the DOS port of Double Dragon every stream and clear it for some reason. I don't know why, but I do that. So if you want to see that, you're welcome to. And I finish off the evening with playing like a retro game. And the one that I'm going to be starting next week is a game called Hokkaido Rensa Satsujin, which is a game from 1984, and it's for the PC-88, which is a computer that they had in Japan. I'm playing this in Japanese and using Google Translate to help me out with some of the translations, and chat also helps me with some of the more esoteric translations. The game is by Yuji Horii, who you might know better as
Yeah.
the developer of Dragon Quest. But before that, he made 3 mystery games, and I've already played Portopia on stream. I've played Kurizawa Yukai Enai as well on stream, and this is his 3rd mystery game, so we're diving into that. So that's where you can find me on Tuesdays.
Super exciting. I mean, even just from that little description, I'm sure you'll bring in a lot of my very small audience. So super excited to keep following along with those. And then if you had to recommend some games, what would those be?
I can recommend a few older things and something that's kind of a new old thing. Out of the games that I streamed, I've got a YouTube channel as well where I put up all my VODs. If you just look up my name on YouTube, you'll find that really easily. A game that I did play all through to completion on stream is a game called Earthrise, which is from 1990. It's by a company called Interstell, and it's mostly a one person, Matt Grusin, developed this game. So it's almost like a solo dev kind of thing. And it is a text parser EGA adventure game, which is incredibly charming and just a wonderful play. Like, what a hidden gem. Like, I'd never heard of it until I started to trawl the internet for like all the like the EGA text parser adventure games, because that was my initial thought for my playing of retro games was I'm going to go back and play all the text parser or EGA adventure games that I can. So that was within that. I've since kind of branched out a little bit from that, but yeah, Earthrise, definitely recommend that one. You can just find it for free on the internet.
Cool.
It was really beautiful actually because I think the son-in-law of Matt Grusin contacted me because he found the video on YouTube, and we had a nice conversation. Matt Grusin sadly is no longer with us, but his daughter was saying how she used to be riding around his legs when he was like working on this game on his computer at his desk and things. So yeah, it was a wonderful little connection. Another game I recommend is called the Omnicron Conspiracy, and that's from 1989, published by Epix, and it is not Omnicron Nomad Soul, and it is not the Orion Conspiracy or whatever, the Orion whatever. It's Omnicron Conspiracy, 1989. It's got a really interesting interface as well. It's kind of a bit tougher, but it's another EGA game that is another like sci-fi adventure game, which I do recommend that one as well. And lastly, the new old game that I recommend is called The Aching by Hadrosaurus Software. And I think that one came out in 2024. And you can find Hadrosaurus Software on itch.io. It's a beautiful it's relatively short, but what a beautiful world that has been created for this game. And it actually, I think, also was developed to run on DOS machines, but you don't need a DOS machine to play this. You can play this on anything. Those are my 3 recommendations for small to solo game, like adventure games that were developed that either are old or feel old in a really nice way.
That's great. Yeah, I'll include links to all those in the show notes, along with links to the Crimson Diamond and your work. And then last but not least, since you have so many cool connections, I was wondering if you wouldn't mind recommending some folks who I could try to have on this show, who might be fun guests. I see you wrote down Dave Lloyd, who I already had
I did.
on, which was wonderful that there was that synergy. But yeah, any others who you think would be good?
Absolutely, yeah. There's Adam Riches, who made an adventure game called Locomotive. So if your audience likes adventure games, this is a more of a point and click adventure game, but it is beautifully produced, beautiful animations, incredible music and sound. So yeah, Adam Richards would be a wonderful person to have on. Yan of Golasso Games is another one. He made a game called Inspector Waffles, which is another mystery game.
Cool.
Also, I collaborated with Yan on Chance's Lucky Escape, which is a Playdate Season 2 game.
Oh, sweet.
Yan wrote the story and did the programming, and I did the art and animation and designed the fonts. What's great about Yan is he likes to create all kinds of different games and all different kinds of platforms. So Inspector Waffles is a PC game. Chance's Lucky Escape is a Playdate game, and his game Inspector Waffles Early Days is actually like a Game Boy Advance game
Oh,
that
cool.
so he actually even had like this campaign that you could get like an actual Game Boy cartridge and play it
Oh,
on your Game
wow.
Boy Advance. And so I do have that, and I played it. And you don't have to play it that way, but yeah, I mean, I love the fact that he's kind of goes across all these different platforms and all these different styles and genres of game. And also, I mean, there's so many people, but yeah, the last one I will mention is Francisco Gonzalez, who is one of my big inspirations to even have started working with Adventure Game Studio in the first place. Because in the kind of like early 2000s or 2010s, I discovered Let's Plays of adventure games on YouTube, and someone called Her Crabbiness was playing Francisco's Ben Jordan series of games. And when I saw that, I got really excited because here was someone making full-fledged adventure games all by himself using this particular engine. That's why I got interested in Adventure Game Studio, and that's why I got to think maybe this is something I can do as well. And Francisco has continued. He's made more than a dozen adventure games at this point. His latest is Rosewater, and he's one of those people who just did it. You know, he didn't have any programming training or knowledge. He didn't have any art training or knowledge. He just went ahead and did it, and he just gets better every game.
So cool. Yeah. Well, not only great guests, potential guests that I'll definitely reach out to, but also some wonderful game recommendations there. Julia, I can't thank you enough. You've been so generous with your time and knowledge, and it's just meant so much to me as someone who really admires the Crimson Diamond and really admires you as a designer. So thank you so much.
Well, no, thank you so much. I say this every time someone even ever wants to talk to me is I'm always eager to talk about the Crimson Diamond. I share knowledge and all these things because one of the great things about nowadays making games is that anyone can make a game, and so you get all kinds of incredibly unique, diverse games. The only like the opposite of a silver lining, I guess, is like this minor like drawback of the fact that everyone can make games is that it's hard for some people to like find your game. It's hard to get visibility. So I'm always excited to get to come on any place and talk about making games, just the designing of games, my games in particular. It's just wonderful. So thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for being someone who does boost and support indie devs.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I was just talking about this with a guest I interviewed yesterday, but it was like, it's something that just brings me unparalleled joy. Not only like getting to boost the art projects, but getting to like talk to the humans behind them and find those connections is like just very beautiful to me. So
It is. I think so.
and that was Julia. What a lively and fascinating conversation. She was such a wonderful, wonderful guest and one of the most personally inspiring guests that we've had on the show, just for me yet. So what a great conversation. Thank you for following along. To support Julia, go buy and play the Crimson Diamond. You won't regret it. And join those Twitch streams, which, like she said, are Tuesday nights. And all that info will be in the show notes as usual, along with all the recommendations and goodies that were mentioned in this episode. And there were quite a few of them. Through just doing the research for that, I found this website called Abandonware, which allows you to play just so many incredible DOS games in the browser, which is awesome. It's like a built-in emulator. So I'll be poking around there more to be sure. My little spiel for the day is going to be about working incrementally. and finding kind of joy and lift even from tasks that, on their surface might not be pulling you through. So a lot of what Julia talked about and what I really appreciated and found inspiring was not letting, things get in your way. If you want to make something, whether that's a game, a piece of art, whatever, doing it and learning as you go. And I think for me, as someone who's fiddled around with making games in the past, one of the things that's gotten in my way the most is like trying to make the thing right away and trying to put it all together and not being able to, and then feeling sad about that, right? And putting the project to the side and moving on to other things. But the way she described it, it brought me toward this word that I used a lot when I was talking about kind of my interest in English classes in college, which was like steeping in a book, steeping in a subject, and having that time to reflect and percolate without having any kind of expectation or goals for a thing outside of learning. And I think that is such an organic and wonderful way to hear how the Crimson Diamond came about, where it started with just these, pixel art experiments, sketching these interiors as an experiment and as kind of the joy of learning pixel art. And from there has stemmed not only an incredible game, an incredible career in games, but a great community of folks who are excited to help. And that was something that Julia mentioned too, getting kind of tied into a community that can help. There are certainly a lot of those regarding adventure games in particular on the internet and games at large if you look in the right places. And I just think that this idea, there's something there where it's like, when I was learning how to write and when I was writing my first couple novel manuscripts, I had this idea that Stephen King wrote in his book on writing, which is a great read if anyone's interested in creative practice, where it's just like you have to shut yourself in a room for a number of hours every day and do the thing. And while I think that's true to a degree, with writing, it's like you're always writing toward something. Whereas with game dev, it's like a lot of it is just learning how to do the thing. And then once you can do the thing, it seems like things come together rather not quickly, but far more quick than if you were to just try to put it all together and have to learn as you go toward working toward that final product. And that's why I think a lot of game developers say make small games, make small projects, and work your way up. But I think I just love the idea of like, it doesn't have to be a game. It can just be like drawing detectives using pixel art. And then if you like them, doing the next thing, like animating them. And then if you like that, doing the next thing, like finding out how to interact with objects, but having it be incremental and developing this practice, as I've talked about with other guests, where it's like, it can be eclectic. It doesn't have to be every day you sit down and draw and code and put the game together. It can be, today I want to draw. Tomorrow I want to make music for the game. The next day I want to watch a coding tutorial and download the software on my computer and poke around, right? And so I think for me that's been so hard because on a timeline of like, I want to have results in a day, in a week, in a month, not having that can really feel like it can really deject me and can really make me feel like less than or like I'm not achieving, right? And so I think it's about redefining what I'm doing, not from a lens of like, am I achieving, but rather, am I steeping? Am I enjoying? Am I learning, right? And I think so much better creative material can come out of that process, and certainly a better process can come out of that process. And I think that's what's important. So that's all I got to say today. If you've been with me so far, I really appreciate it. If you've listened this far, it means you're probably enjoying the show. So the best thing you can do is just tell one friend. I don't do anything to advertise, and I do want to grow my audience. So folks like Julia, so folks who are coming on and donating their time are able to get more plays and to get more sales and to just overall be supported more in this ecosystem where I see this meme going around where it's like, well, I don't know if it's a meme, but it's an adage, maybe a depressed saying where it's like, if you starve the artists, of course the world is ugly, right? And so really, really what I want to do is just have all these wonderful artists on my show be able to continue to make their games, continue to find success in it, and continue to be able to relax themselves so they have that time to steep. So tell one friend, if we get this thing big enough, who knows where we can go. But it all starts with just telling one person, and I'll stop it there. Really appreciate you listening along, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.